I think there's a fine line between choosing a tank that is good and choosing a tank that is fun. Originally, I was going to do this video yesterday, but then we saw what I would consider some pretty major buffs and nerfs to some of these tanks. While it's probably safe to say play what you enjoy, enjoyment doesn't always lead to success. So in this video, I want to talk briefly about how each of the tanks are playing right now, how I would rank them in terms of pure enjoyment, and lastly, what I'm going to be focusing on in Dragonflight. Starting things off with the Blood Death Knight, this class can be quite a handful, but if played correctly, can also be extremely enjoyable. I personally would say this is my least favorite tank, but I also want to accompany this with the statement that I thoroughly enjoy playing each and every tank. The main reason that I love tanking so much is that there's such a variance in playstyle between all of the tanks. If you don't enjoy a certain tank because of X, Y, or Z, there are 5 other tanks to try. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. The best way I can explain Blood Death Knight is, imagine you're trying to juggle 5 balls while riding a unicycle across like a tightrope between 2 mountains over a boiling lake of lava. Death Knights have a ton of resources and buffs that they need to track and manage all the time. It's not just bone shield charges, but how many of them you currently have active, also being efficient with your runes, your runic power, and the spending of your runic power. Throughout the talent tree, it's pretty hard to avoid certain maintenance buffs like Icy Talons or Coagulopathy. Coagulopath? That can't be right. Nah, whatever. Unholy Ground, Bone Shield, etc., which requires the player to always be paying attention to every little detail. While it's not super difficult to maintain certain buffs like Icy Talons, this accompanied with the 8 other things that you need to track at the same time just is a pretty large turnoff for making this my main. Again, I can't stress how fun this tank actually is to play though, it's just personally my least favorite out of the bunch, so when deciding to main a class for Dragonflight, I'd pretty much eliminate this from my list first. I'll probably come around to playing it whenever I get the time to level 1, but that probably won't be until Season 2 or 3. The Vengeance Demon Hunter is an extremely fluid class. The rotation feels great, and the damage is pretty insane, and that's all accompanied with a great source of self-sustain. While the class is fun, it feels slightly limited. Outside of a few major cooldowns, there are just points where you find yourself like hitting 1 or a 2 button rotation for a short period of time. Unlike the Death Knight having too much to press, the Demon Hunter just feels like it has too little. Along with this, it's one of the only classes that has like an active mitigation that isn't spammable or have 100% uptime, which does require a little bit of thought. You can argue Calcified Spikes and Demon Spikes together can result in fairly high uptime, but having nothing outside of Metamorphosis windows creates a pretty dry feeling between uses of that and Fell Devastation. When it comes to the talent tree though, there aren't as many impactful choices when it comes to like utility or playstyle change, so it was a hard decision, but I personally just won't be playing this spec at the start of Season 1 in Dragonflight. I've been maining this class for years, since Battle for Azeroth. Bear's had a lot of positive changes over the last few weeks on beta and small design philosophy shifts. While this class has a limited kit with its utility within the class tree, there are a lot of fun and relatively competitive options in the spec tree. Certain abilities like After the Wildfire, Tooth and Claw, Dream of Cenarius, and Galactic Guardian allow for a lot of like cool niche builds within the tree. While I may personally not want to run Dream of Cenarius, a player who wants to lean into that build and playstyle because they enjoy the ability to heal their allies is just great. That's actually why I love these new talent trees so much. A good tree will have multiple options that add flavor to a class, and it's an RPG after all. Don't get me wrong, these trees aren't perfect when it comes to like pathing. Actually, I think they're probably some of the worst talent trees in the game, but I think Guardians should be eager to mess around with some of these choices at endgame. The reason I rank Guardian Druid more enjoyable as a tank is because it, after all, is a really simple tank to play. As someone who typically makes calls and takes charge in Mythic Plus, it makes a huge difference to not only be able to play a class that's comfortable, but an easy class. That's the main reason why I find Bear a little bit more enjoyable than the other two before it. My Protection Warrior journey started in Season 3 of Shadowlands, when I did my 0 to Hero challenge, and I'm really glad I picked up the class back then, because now it's one of my favorite classes to play. Protection Warrior got a pretty massive glow up with the new talent trees. It's a fast-paced class that feels extremely fluid and very, very sturdy. There aren't many times that I feel threatened from the incoming damage profile. The rotation now is actually easy enough for anyone to pick up, but it also can be min-max, which for a competitive player is just a major attraction. The different feedback loops by spending and building rage is just unmatched by most tanks. Any class with cooldown reduction I think deserves an award. Regardless of my opinion, I think anyone who's thinking about Warrior or is on the fence or doesn't know what tank to play or even wants to just try something new, just send the Warrior. I promise you won't regret it. Maybe. This is probably a hot take, but I absolutely cherish the Dusk and Dawn playstyle of the moderately reworked Protection Paladin. I also really enjoy Avenger Shield not generating holy power, but instead acting as like an amplifier or a hit combo type ability. The button still feels great to hit, especially now with Tyr's Enforcer talent. Protection Paladin also got a pretty huge glow up in the defensive department with things like Sentinel Choice Node along with the return of Eye of Tyr. The spec feels much more methodical, but not overwhelming unlike the Blood Death Knight. The idea is that you maintain Dusk and Dawn while managing your holy power. I've already done a video on the Dusk and Dawn rotation, though the talent was actually very recently nerfed. Actually, during the recording of this video. But nerfed in like a good way. So while the damage and the damage reduction values got reduced slightly, it will now be easier to maintain both of these buffs. The pure utility, defensive options, and offensive kit accompanied with the methodical playstyle just makes this by far one of my favorite tanks to play. Despite its criticism for most of beta, the gameplay flow of Brewmaster is just unmatched. While I absolutely despise the button bloat, the rotation now isn't set in stone, so players can adapt it to fit their playstyle or based on the situation they might find themselves in. While the damage was recently gutted, it was a much needed nerf. Regardless, the talent tree is extremely flexible, especially in the spec tree to fit a ton of different desired builds. If you decide to play something like Charred Passions, you'll have a ton of fun trying to maintain this buff to deal insane damage in AoE and single target. The other thing about the Brewmaster Monk is the general skill expression. It's pretty hard to tell a major difference between like a good Guardian Druid player and the best Guardian Druid player, for example, but when it comes to Brewmaster, it's super easy to differentiate the two. From use of utility, cooldown planning, healing, as well as their movement, this class is extremely engaging. It's by far my favorite tank to play, and it has been for the last 2 years or so. So with all of that out of the way, what am I planning on playing in Dragonflight? As of now, which is only about 5 days or so from Dragonflight, my plan is to focus on 3 tanks at the start. The only tank that was easy to leave behind was DK. It was a tough decision, but I've landed on Guardian Druid, Protection Warrior, and Protection Paladin. It's looking like the Protection Warrior is probably going to be the safest choice, assuming they will not receive any more nerfs. It's super tanky, super fun to play, and most seasons I end up ignoring what's deemed meta, and I always regret it. The Guardian Druid comes from a place of attachment, but also it's just looking really competitive for the first time since Season 2 of Shadowlands, which conveniently enough was the only season that I didn't play much in Mythic Plus. Actually, didn't play much in general. It's a tank that I'm really comfortable on, which means that I have an easier time shot calling in dungeons and focusing on the small nuanced things like CC, grouping, and pacing. And then originally Paladin was going to be my dark horse choice, but as I was finishing up this script and beginning to record, they got a massive 40% buff to Word of Glory, which arguably is the only thing that was holding them back from being extremely competitive. I played this class casually in Legion, and then picked it up as a secondary tank in early Battle for Azeroth. Similar to the Druid, it's a class I'm very comfortable on, but also it's in the most enjoyable state since I started playing it, in my opinion. Man, I hate that I always have to say in my opinion. Anyways, Dragonflight comes out on November 28th, and my plan is to level all 3 of these classes to level 70 within the first week. Most expansions I've done 2. I've never really done 3 before, so it's going to be interesting to see if I can pull it off as well as getting all of my chores done. I will be streaming at least part of the process, so if you want to watch that, go check me out on Twitch. Link will be in the description. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Tons of guides will be posted to my YouTube channel and in my Discord leading up to the release of Season 1. I've never been more excited for an expansion, and I hope you're excited as well. I'll see you all soon. Peace.